The narcissistic personality disorder, what is it? How does it come into being? What are its criteria? This is Shores of Infinity with your host Chris speaking. This usually is a channel on spirituality, enlightenment, but also on psychology, because psychology plays a huge role on the path to enlightenment. And you probably do not suffer from narcissistic personality disorder, but you will and probably have encountered people with that disorder. And it is very good to recognize them. It's a very helpful skill to recognize people with personality disorders. And often there are more than one. You can have more than one personality disorder. For example, antisocial and narcissistic, or narcissistic and borderline, or borderline and histrionic. The most famous of all those personality disorders is the narcissistic personality disorder. What's a narcissist? A narcissist is the ultimate victim. He is so victimized that he or she feels justified to torture others. The end justifies the means, and all means are okay in its pursuit, or his or her pursuit, to protect him or herself. So that this abuse that happened somewhere in the past can never happen again. This is very similar to any trauma response, but in this case it's a very, very extreme trauma response. The early development of ego has been so squashed in its early bloom that a false self has been created. Again, this is similar to all trauma responses and to all egos, but here it is more extreme. The normal kind of ego, which is also a false self, of course, has not been allowed to develop for some reason. Maybe because of a narcissistic father. Usually there's one part of the parents who is treating you like a piece of shit, and another parent who is treating you like an angel, like a gift from God. And this discrepancy, plus the early destruction of the young ego, leads to a new, stranger, weaker false self being created, which has the delusion of grandeur, the delusion of omnipotence, the delusion that as long as I'm okay, it's fine, no matter who suffers in my path or wake. I have suffered so much in my childhood that now I can take whatever I want. The world owes that to me. Humanity owes that to me. Unfortunately, this also leads to the incapacity for true moral feeling. I'm basing this video partly on what Sam Wagner wrote and said. He's not very spiritual, but he knows a lot about narcissism. And he has provided the best explanation of narcissism that I've ever heard or read. If there is a hereditary or genetic component to narcissism, it's still being discussed. It's not sure yet. Maybe, maybe not. Also, even if you were growing up in this kind of context that I talked about earlier, where one parent is mean and the other one is too nice, it doesn't mean you have to develop narcissistic personality disorder. It's just more likely. Sam Wagner calls it malignant self-love. So it's a self-hatred, which is then transformed in an Adlerian way into self-love. This minority complex becomes a megalomania big time. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's very important to study narcissism, because narcissism is just an over-exaggerated way of how the ego functions in everyone. We all have this. is just exaggerated to a huge degree. Narcissists can be very moody, but they also can be very unemotional. They don't show emotions much there. They can have the perfect poker face or the perfect spy face. They also don't get nervous easily. And they usually don't have any remorse or mercy. So they're very similar to antisocial and psychopath personality disorders. But contrary to psychopaths, what they usually have is a very unregulated emotional life. So they can, like all of these personality disorders, they can change moods in an instant, from really nice to really horrible, or the other way around. And of course, a narcissism needs an audience. They need someone, one or several people, to give them their supply all the time. And the supply is admiration. They need to be admired. There's this Leo joke of this 12 zodiacs. How many Leos do you need to screw in a light bulb? 11. 1 to screw in the light bulb and 10 to applaud. This could also be about a narcissist. And by the way, there are probably equal amounts of female and male narcissists. It's not mostly male, but it's more recognizable, more obvious in a man. Plus, as I explained in previous videos, not all narcissists suffer from narcissism in the same intensity. There's a scale I have adopted from 0 to 5. Because 0 would be no narcissism, 1 and 2 would be difficult to perceive. Now and then it would be obvious. 3, it's quite obvious already, that's kind of average. And 4 and 5 is flamboyant, is very, very extreme and very, very difficult to get along with. So it's very difficult to recognize a narcissism personality disorder strength 1 or 2, but easy to recognize 3, 4 or 5. Unless you, of course, you have a codependent personality disorder or a borderline disorder, then it might be that it's very difficult for you to recognize a narcissist because you fit so well together. Another thing about narcissists, just as well as psychopaths, antisocial and borderline, is that they can come up with the most abstruse stuff and tell it in a very believable way. They're very, very good liars and storytellers. And they like to see themselves as the victim in every interaction, as I said before. And they like to turn things around. If you confront a narcissist with being a narcissist, then he or she will immediately turn it around and make him or herself into the victim and you into the perpetrator. Suddenly you're to blame for everything. Or he will reject everything and make it seem as you have imagined it all, which is called gaslighting. But they will not take long for that. Within seconds they will come up with some explanations. Another interesting aspect is that the narcissist will create a field of delusion around him or herself. A delusion which she or he probably believes him or herself, at least partly, sometimes fully. So it can be also psychotic. And they will make others around them also believe their delusion. It's catching like a disease. For example, I've been working in a school, in the high school once, and it was a private school, and the owner of the private school had both narcissistic and borderline personality disorder, medium strong, 3. And he really managed that all the directors, all the headmasters and mistresses and all the school staff, the teachers and the administration and everyone believed in his delusion. Except me, because I recognize narcissists quite quickly. But initially, I also believed in his delusion partly for some time, until I found out his tells. Like a poker player, you can find out the tells of narcissists, and you need a baseline, of course. That's the trouble. Someone who's faking all the time is difficult to get a baseline for. Once you have the baseline, it's easy to find the tells, and once you find the tells, then you know when you're being lied to and tried to manipulate it, pulled into their field of delusion, their warped sense of reality. Of course, I'm not working for that school anymore, because that's the one and only thing you can do, is to get out of his or her way. The way to deal with narcissists, psychopaths, and antisocial personality disorder afflicted people is to avoid them. Don't try to heal them. It's not possible. Not for you. If they go to a trauma therapist themselves on their own accord because they want to get healed, then they have a chance. But if they don't want to, no one can help them. Just assume that everything they say is a lie or a manipulation, and get the hell out of Dodge. Just avoid them. And if your boss is a psychopath, change job. If your boss is a narcissist or borderliner, change job. If your love relationship partner is a narcissist, change relationship. Leave this relationship as soon as possible, ASAP. Unfortunately, narcissists like to be together with codependents, and codependents like to try to save the narcissist. So there's an unhealthy relationship which works for some weird reason. It works well, but unhealthy for both, especially for the codependent. Another interesting thing is that narcissists don't necessarily have to be physically violent. They usually are not. They are manipulators. And so they can manipulate the hell out of you, especially if you are a child, but later also. And they're so good at manipulation that as an adult, don't try to outsmart them. They're more experienced and well-trained than you in manipulation, most probably. But as a child, you're completely at their mercy. So if you happen to have the misfortune of having such a person as a parent or some other kind of legal guardian, it's horrible. They might scream at you for hours. They might tell you that you're a worthless piece of shit, that you're stupid and ugly and so on. And if that is your parent, you probably believe it, at least initially. Again and again, there are people who try to provoke narcissists into showing their true face, into counter-manipulating or blocking until he will freak out and show his ugly face. Don't try to do that. Just get out. There's also another rarer type, a covert narcissist, of whom I will talk in another video, which is more difficult to recognize and to spot. Just remember, only because the similarities between different kinds of personality disorders and between personality disorders and psychopaths doesn't mean that they're the same, and doesn't mean that they're as easy to spot as psychopaths in movies and crime series. Narcissists can very well be functioning members of any community, can very well hold a responsible job or office for a longer time. Just look at politicians, many of them are narcissists. Why can they hold, although they're in principle irresponsible and unpredictable and moody and so on, and delusional, why can they hold a job for a longer time, which a psychopath, for example, cannot? Because they get enough supply. Politicians get plenty of narcissistic supply, get plenty of admiration, and that keeps them going, just like gas or electricity keeps a car going. Now the last thing for this video, maybe there will be another video on narcissism another time, there's a lot to say about it, but the last question is, of course, is it treatable? Personality disorders in general are difficult to treat, but possible to treat. As I said before, the prerequisite is that someone wants to be treated. He or she cannot be forced or manipulated into being treated. Usually narcissists know full well that they are narcissists and that there's something wrong with them. They just don't show it and don't talk about it much. And of course they are also not like you or me. They're not in the same state of mind and consciousness all the time. They have ups and downs and fluctuations, and even that the intensity they have been talking about before, for example, narcissism strength 3, this can also vary. It's just the baseline. So they might not be very narcissistic for some time and then very later. And in this not narcissistic time, they may try to make up for past mistakes and even go to therapy. And then it is possible to help them with trauma therapy. It's a trauma response, so you have to do trauma therapy. Not any kind of talking therapy, psychoanalysis and behavioral therapy and so on doesn't work. They usually manipulate the hell out of any therapist. Only a seasoned trauma therapist can deal with them. Or something like radical honesty, for example. But it will be very painful. It will be even more painful than trauma therapy can be for anyone else. Because, of course, you will have to address at some point this false self. You have to address at some point this very tiny natural ego that has not been allowed to develop and is still not being developed. So a narcissist basically is a child. And instead of developing the normal ego, which of course also is a false self, to a degree which can be called adult or adolescent or whatever, there's this false self, and this has to be addressed. And it's very, very, very scary. It creates existential fear to the utmost degree to look at this false self and try to replace it again with original ego. Definitely the personality disorder can be toned down in intensity, ameliorated, so to say. It's not clear if it can be treated totally, so that it really disappears. There are some psychologists who say that they can. Richard Schwartz, for example, with his internal family systems. Lastly, really lastly now, if you tend to be confronted with narcissists again and again and again in any kind of relationship, then you have to look at yourself. You probably also have some kind of personality disorder, codependent or whatever, another one, to attract narcissists that much. Okay, that's it for today. Write your questions and comments below. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Thank you to all my patrons. Thank you for joining me as a patron, and see you soon. One more bonus for those who have listened for a longer time. Of course, you will wonder, what does this have to do with spirituality? As I said in the beginning, you will encounter these people, and a lot of spiritual people are codependent, so they have an even higher chance to encounter narcissists and have problems with narcissists. But two more aspects. If you suffer from a personality disorder like narcissism to a stronger degree or codependency, then it is more difficult for you to progress beyond 499 on the Hawkins scale. to progress into the love phase and later the enlightenment stages. Huh? If you don't love yourself, if you despise yourself in reality, although you don't show that to others, it's difficult, of course, to enter the love phase, which is a necessary step towards enlightenment. Also, any spiritual group will sooner or later attract narcissists. Orville, for example. I lived for many years in Orville, India, and they try their best to not let narcissists enter the community. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And there, for example, there were 2 narcissists who were not allowed to join the community. And since then, for years and years and years, I think it's 10 years or so, they're doing everything in their power to discredit Orville, to lie about Orville, to spread horrible rumors about Orville as a revenge. It's one of their life's purposes now. So they want to destroy the reputation of Orville. That's how narcissists work. So do not assume that only because a group is spiritual or religious or whatever, that in this group there will be no narcissists. The opposite is true. There will probably be more narcissists as average than average, because they're looking for supply, they're looking for victims. Every group that includes a lot of victims will attract narcissists. And people on the spiritual path very often include a large number of people with victim mentality. If you see yourself as a victim, go to trauma therapy as quickly as possible to get rid of this very, very self-destructive personality trait. Bye for now.